I knew something was wrong the second I walked into the lobby and saw Jennifer avoiding my eyes. Jennifer from reception, who'd greeted me every morning for the past 8 years, was suddenly fascinated by her computer screen like it held the secrets of the universe. My name's Chris Hayes, I'm 48, and I've been working at Apex Aerospace for 25 years. Started right after I got out of the Navy, where I spent 6 years as an operations officer on destroyers in the Pacific Fleet. You learn a few things in the military, like how to read people, how to plan ahead, and most importantly, how to spot trouble before it spots you. That morning, every instinct I'd developed during night watches in the South China Sea was screaming that something was off. The trouble started with an Outlook ping at 8:47 a.m. Urgent meeting. Conference room B, 9:15 a.m. No context, no agenda, just a summons. In corporate speak, that's never good news. In military terms, it's what we used to call an all-hands meeting, the kind where somebody's about to get their world rearranged. Let me back up for a minute. 3 weeks earlier, I just closed the biggest deal of my career, an $18 million contract with Boeing for specialized titanium aerospace components. This wasn't some handshake deal or lucky break. I'd been cultivating this relationship for 3 years, ever since Boeing started looking for new suppliers after their last vendor failed a critical stress test that grounded half their fleet. The negotiation process took 8 months. 8 months of flying back and forth to Seattle, sitting in conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation, going through technical specifications that would make your eyes bleed. Boeing doesn't mess around with aerospace components. One failure at 30,000 feet and you're not just losing money, you're losing lives. They put our entire operation through audits that would make the IRS jealous. But I understood their world because I'd lived in it. 6 years on Navy destroyers teaches you that when someone says a part is mission critical, they're not using corporate buzzwords. They mean people's lives depend on getting it right. When Boeing's procurement team grilled me about our quality control processes, I didn't give them marketing presentations. I walked them through our facility like a commanding officer inspecting his ship. Every bolt, every test, every backup system. That contract put us at 10 straight quarters of growth, something that hadn't happened in company history. More importantly, it positioned Apex as a Tier 1 supplier for Boeing's next-generation aircraft program, work that could keep us busy for the next decade. My bonus was set to vest the next day. $3.2 million. 25 years of building relationships, understanding supply chains, and knowing every regulation from the FAA to the Department of Defense. That money wasn't just a bonus. It was validation that experience actually matters in a world that seems to worship 25-year-olds with MBAs and fresh ideas. But walking through those hallways that morning, I felt like a condemned man heading to his execution. People I'd worked with for decades suddenly found their phones incredibly interesting when I passed by. Martinez from Quality Control literally ducked into a supply closet when he saw me coming. Rodriguez from Shipping, a guy I'd helped get promoted twice, studied the floor tiles like he was counting them for inventory. The problem wasn't my performance. It was my age and my salary. Rebecca Kane, our CEO for the past 3 years, had been making noises about modernizing the workforce. Her son Andy Kane, fresh out of Wharton with an MBA and somehow already a VP at 32, had been scheduling meetings with my team without including me. Suddenly, every decision needed fresh perspectives from people who'd never spent a day on a factory floor or dealt with government inspectors. I'd seen this movie before. In the Navy, we called it ticket punching. Young officers who rotated through departments just long enough to get a line on their resume before moving on to the next assignment. They'd show up, change systems that had worked for decades, create chaos, then disappear, leaving the senior NCOs to clean up the mess. Andy Kane was a ticket puncher. Everything was about quarterly numbers and cost optimization. He'd never negotiated with Boeing, never dealt with an FAA audit, never had to explain to a client why their aircraft was grounded because of a faulty component. But he had an MBA and fresh ideas, and in corporate America that apparently counted for more than 25 years of actual results. I took the long way to Conference Room B. Old habit from my Navy days. Never rush into an unknown situation without doing a little reconnaissance first. I stopped by my office and opened the locked drawer where I kept my contract. All 12 pages of it, including the amendments I'd negotiated over the years. Most people don't read their contracts. They sign them, file them away, and forget about them. but 25 years in manufacturing teaches you that the devil's always in the details. And when you've seen how quickly companies can change direction, especially when new leadership comes in with different priorities, you learn to protect yourself. I flipped to Section 7, subsection C. The clause I'd insisted on during my last contract renewal 18 months ago. It was buried in legal language, but the core was simple. If they terminated me within 48 hours of a major bonus vesting without documented cause, they owed me double the amount plus damages. I'd written it myself after watching 3 good friends get canned right before their retirements. Rebecca Kane had signed that clause without reading it. Her son Andy had been in the room rolling his eyes when I explained it during the contract renewal. "Whatever keeps the old guard happy," he'd said. "Just get him locked in through the Boeing deal." I remembered that phrase clearly because it told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed me, not as a partner or valued team member, but as a temporary necessity until they could figure out how to replace me with someone cheaper. The clause was my insurance policy. I'd learned from watching colleagues get burned that loyalty only flows one direction in corporate America. Companies will talk about family and values and all that nonsense, but when quarterly numbers get tight, experience becomes expensive and expendable. So you protect yourself with the one thing executives understand: legal language that costs them money if they screw you over. I folded the contract, put it in my briefcase, and headed to my execution. Conference room B had its blinds drawn, which is never a good sign. Inside, Rebecca sat at the head of the table with Nicole Patterson from HR and some outside lawyer I didn't recognize. No laptops, no performance reviews, no documentation, just termination papers and 3 people who couldn't look me in the eye. "Chris," Rebecca said, trying to sound sympathetic but mostly sounding like someone practicing lines for a play. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "Of course," I replied, taking my time to scan the room. "Always have time for the team." Nobody smiled. The lawyer was tapping a pen nervously. Nicole had a folder in front of her that she kept opening and closing like she couldn't decide if she wanted to read from it. Classic signs of people about to do something they knew was wrong. "I'll cut to the chase," Rebecca said, clearing her throat. "We're restructuring the operations division. Unfortunately, your position is being eliminated effective immediately." I nodded slowly. "I see. What's the timeline for this restructuring?" She blinked, clearly not expecting questions. "The timeline?" "Yes. When did the board approve this restructuring? How many other positions are being eliminated? What's the business justification?" The lawyer leaned forward. "Mr. Hayes, these are operational decisions that don't require detailed explanation." "Actually, they do," I said calmly, "especially for someone with my level of security clearance and client relationships. The Pentagon requires specific protocols for personnel changes involving classified contracts." That was true, though I wasn't sure they knew it. The confused look that passed between Rebecca and the lawyer told me they hadn't done their homework. "We've consulted with all relevant authorities," Nicole said quickly, though her voice suggested she wasn't sure what authorities those might be. "Good," I said. "I assume you have the documentation for that consultation? The 60-day notice requirement for key personnel with my clearance level?" The silence that followed was telling. The lawyer was scribbling notes now, probably realizing they'd stepped in something messy. Rebecca tried to regain control. "Chris, this isn't about your performance. Your work has been exemplary. This is purely a business decision about organizational efficiency." "Without cause then," I said. "Exactly. No reflection on your abilities whatsoever." "Perfect. They were building my case for me." "We'll need your badge and access cards," Nicole added, sliding the termination papers across the table. I read them quickly. Standard corporate language about restructuring, no mention of performance issues, no documentation of cause, no reference to any business analysis or board approval. Exactly what I'd expected from people who thought firing me a day before my bonus vested was clever cost management. "Understood," I said, signing the papers and handing over my badge. "I assume you'll send my personal items?" "Of course," Rebecca said, visibly relieved that I wasn't making a scene. "And Chris, we really appreciate your years of service. This was a difficult business decision." I smiled. Business decisions usually are, especially when you don't think them through. The comment hung in the air as I stood to leave. Rebecca looked confused, but the lawyer caught the implication. I saw him write something down and underline it twice. I walked out of that room calmer than I'd felt in months. because what Rebecca and her precious son didn't understand was that they'd just triggered the exact scenario I'd protected myself against. They thought they were saving $3.2 million by firing me before my bonus vested. Instead, they'd just activated a clause that would cost them a lot more than that. Instead of heading to the parking garage, I took the elevator to the legal department. I'd spent enough time there during the Boeing negotiations to know who still had some integrity left in this place. Patricia Williams had been with the company for 15 years, long enough to remember when experience mattered more than family connections. She'd helped navigate the regulatory maze for the Boeing contract, working weekends and late nights to make sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. She understood the difference between MBA theories and real-world consequences. I found her in her office, working through a stack of compliance documents that probably had something to do with cleaning up Andy Kane's latest brilliant initiative. "Chris," she said, looking up surprised. "I heard, are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, sitting down and opening my briefcase. "But I need you to look at something." I handed her my contract, open to Section 7. They just terminated me. Effective immediately. No cause cited. No documentation of business justification. She read it once, then again more slowly. Her expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching horror. "Chris, this clause. If they fired you within 48 hours of your bonus vesting, without documented cause," I finished. Which they just did. In front of witnesses, with no board approval, no analysis, and apparently no consultation with the relevant authorities about my security clearance. Patricia sat back in her chair. "They owe you double the bonus amount plus damages. And according to this, language about key personnel retention." She paused, calculating. "We're talking about close to $5 million. "That's about right," I said. She stared at me. "Did you know this would happen?" "I suspected it might. Andy's been gunning for older executives since he got here. Easier to replace us with people who will work for half the salary and won't question his brilliant strategies." Patricia shook her head slowly. "Chris, this isn't just about money. If word gets out that we terminated a key executive right before a major bonus without cause, especially someone with government clearance and client relationships like yours." "The optics aren't great," I agreed. "It's worse than that. Boeing specifically requires stability in their supplier's leadership team. It's written into the contract. If they find out we just fired our primary liaison without proper transition protocols..." She paused, the full implications hitting her. "We could lose the entire contract." That was news to me, but it made sense. Boeing doesn't mess around with supplier relationships, especially after some of their recent issues with quality control. They want to know exactly who's responsible for what, and they don't like surprises. "I need to escalate this immediately," she said, reaching for her phone. "I'd appreciate that. But Patricia, I want this handled quietly at first. Let them realize their mistake before we make it public." She nodded, already dialing. "I'll call the senior partners at Morrison & Associates. They need to see this contract language right away." I left Patricia's office and headed to the parking garage, but before I got in my car, I made one more stop. I texted Rodriguez, my old Navy buddy who now worked as a defense contractor consultant in Colorado Springs. "Just got terminated from Apex. Might be looking for new opportunities. You know anyone hiring experienced operations managers?" Rodriguez had been my operations chief on the USS Halsey. We'd served together for 3 years, and I'd helped him navigate the transition to civilian life when he got out. In the military, you take care of your people, and they take care of you. It's not networking, it's brotherhood. His response came back in minutes. "Half the industry's been waiting for you to leave that place. Let's talk." That afternoon, while I was home having lunch and watching the news, my phone started ringing. First Patricia, then the senior legal counsel, then Rebecca herself. Each call more urgent than the last. I let them all go to voicemail. By 4 p.m., I had 6 missed calls and 3 emails marked urgent. The last email was from Rebecca, asking if I could come in tomorrow to discuss the transition. I replied with one line: "Please refer to Section 7, subsection C of my employment contract." The real panic started the next morning. I woke up to 12 missed calls and an email from Morrison & Associates requesting an immediate meeting. Apparently, Patricia hadn't wasted any time getting the outside lawyers involved. But first, I had a coffee meeting with Rodriguez. We met at a diner near Peterson Air Force Base, the kind of place where retired military guys gather to complain about how the younger generation doesn't understand the value of discipline and experience. Chris, Rodriguez said, sliding into the booth across from me, you've got timing. Lockheed's looking for someone to head up their new aerospace components division. Defense contracts, government liaison work, the whole 9 yards. They specifically want someone with your background. What kind of background? Military operations experience, aerospace manufacturing, government clearance, proven track record with major contracts. Sound familiar? I smiled. Might be interested. There's more. 3 other companies have reached out in the past 24 hours. Word travels fast in this industry, especially when someone with your reputation becomes available. What word exactly? Rodriguez grinned. That Apex just made the dumbest personnel decision in aerospace history, firing the guy who landed their biggest contract ever right before his bonus with no documented cause. People are asking what kind of amateur operation Rebecca Kane is running over there. That was interesting. I'd underestimated how quickly news travels in the aerospace industry. Everyone knows everyone, and when a major supplier makes a questionable move, people talk. There's something else, Rodriguez continued. Boeing's procurement team called around yesterday asking questions about supplier stability. Apparently they got wind of some personnel changes at Apex and wanted to make sure their contracts weren't at risk. I felt a cold satisfaction. The consequences were already spreading beyond what Rebecca and Andy had anticipated. What did you tell them? The truth. That Apex just lost the best operations manager in the business for no apparent reason. By the time I got to Morrison & Associates' office downtown, the conference room was packed. Rebecca, Andy Kane, Nicole, Patricia, and 3 lawyers I didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense enough to cut with a knife. Chris, Rebecca started, trying to regain control, we've reviewed your contract, and we think there might be some room for negotiation. There's no room for negotiation, I interrupted. You terminated me without cause within 48 hours of my bonus vesting. The contract language is clear. One of the outside lawyers leaned forward. Mr. Hayes, surely we can work out a reasonable settlement. The settlement is already defined in my contract, I said. Double the bonus amount plus damages for breach of the key personnel retention clause. Andy spoke up for the first time. This is ridiculous. We can't pay almost $5 million because of some technicality. I looked at him calmly. In the Navy, we had a saying about young officers who thought they knew everything. Loud and wrong is still wrong. Andy Kane was Exhibit A. It's not a technicality when I wrote the clause specifically to prevent what you just did. And you were in the room when your mother signed it. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca's face had gone pale. Andy was staring at the table like it might provide answers. Nicole looked like she wanted to disappear. Patricia pulled out a thick folder. Actually, there's more. We've discovered that Mr. Hayes' termination violated several company policies regarding key personnel with government clearances. The Pentagon specifically requires 60-day notice for anyone with his level of access. We also failed to notify Boeing of the personnel change, which violates Section 12 of their supplier agreement. I hadn't even known about the Boeing notification requirement, but it certainly didn't hurt my case. One of the lawyers whispered something urgent to Rebecca. Her face went from pale to gray. What would it take to resolve this quietly? She asked. Honor the contract, I said simply. Pay what you owe, and we can all move on. And if we don't? I smiled. Then it becomes a matter for the board, and probably the Department of Defense, given the clearance violations. I imagine our government contracts might be at risk if this becomes public. The room went dead quiet. Apex had over $200 million in active government contracts. Losing those would destroy the company. We need time to consider our options, Rebecca said weakly. You have 48 hours, I replied. Same time frame you gave me. 2 weeks later, I received a wire transfer for $4.8 million. No fanfare, no press release, just the money appearing in my account with a note. Final settlement per employment contract. The breakdown was exactly what Patricia had calculated. Double the original bonus plus damages, plus an additional settlement for the security clearance violations. They'd also agreed to provide a neutral reference letter and a non-disclosure agreement that worked both ways. They couldn't trash my reputation, and I wouldn't discuss the circumstances of my departure. But silence doesn't stop industry gossip. Within days of my departure, the story had spread through the aerospace community like wildfire. Not the legal details, those stayed confidential, but the basic facts. Apex had fired their most experienced operations manager right after he landed their biggest contract ever. In an industry where relationships and institutional knowledge matter more than spreadsheets, that kind of decision raises questions about leadership competency. Andy Kane was quietly reassigned to a newly created position in business development with no direct reports and an office in the basement. Nicole Patterson left to pursue other opportunities at a small firm in Kansas that nobody had ever heard of. Rebecca remained as CEO, but word around the industry was that the board had stripped her of most operational authority and brought in an interim COO to oversee daily operations. As for me, Rodriguez had been right. Half the industry had been waiting for me to become available. Within a month, I had offers from 3 major defense contractors and 2 consulting firms. I took a position with Vanguard Defense Systems as their senior vice president of operations. The salary was 40% higher than what I'd been making at Apex. The equity package was substantial, and most importantly, they valued experience over youth and flash. The CEO was a former Air Force colonel who understood that in aerospace, there's no substitute for knowing what you're doing. My first project was helping them bid on a $150 million Pentagon contract for next-generation aircraft components, the kind of work I'd been doing for 25 years, but now with a company that appreciated the value of institutional knowledge and client relationships. The best part? My new contract included an even better protection clause. You'd think these corporate types would learn from watching other companies make expensive mistakes, but they never do. They're so focused on quarterly numbers and cost-cutting that they forget the most expensive mistake is getting rid of people who actually know what they're doing. 6 months later, I ran into Martinez from Quality Control at the Aerospace Industries Association conference in Dallas. He'd left Apex 3 months after me, tired of working for people who didn't understand manufacturing. "Chris," he said, shaking his head, "you wouldn't believe the mess they've got over there now." "Tell me." They lost the Boeing contract renewal. The new team Andy brought in didn't understand the technical requirements and submitted a bid that was non-compliant with FAA regulations. Boeing didn't even bother with a counter-proposal, just terminated the supplier agreement. I felt a mix of satisfaction and genuine sadness. That contract had taken years to build, and watching it get destroyed by incompetence was like watching someone burn down a house you'd spent decades building. What about the other government contracts? 3 of them are under review. The Pentagon sent auditors last month after questions were raised about personnel stability and security protocol compliance. Turns out firing someone with your level of clearance without proper notification was a bigger deal than anyone realized. Martinez continued, "Rebecca's brought in consultants to try to rebuild the client relationships, but it's not working. These contracts aren't based on PowerPoint presentations and MBA buzzwords. They're based on trust and proven performance. When you fire the guy who built those relationships, you can't just replace him with fresh graduates and hope for the best." A year later, Apex was acquired by a larger competitor for about 30% of what it had been worth when I left. Rebecca Kane received a golden parachute and moved to Florida to spend more time with family. Andy Kane, last I heard, was working for a tech startup in Austin, trying to disrupt the aerospace industry with artificial intelligence or some other nonsense that sounds impressive to investors who don't know better. The funny thing about the whole situation was that they could have avoided all of it. If they'd wanted me gone, they could have waited until after my bonus vested, given me a proper severance package, and handled the transition professionally. It would have cost them the same $3.2 million they were trying to save, but they would have kept their reputation intact and maintained business relationships worth hundreds of millions. Instead, they got greedy and careless. They assumed I'd roll over and accept whatever they offered because that's what they expected from the old guard. They forgot that experience isn't just about technical knowledge. It's about learning how to protect yourself when people try to take advantage of you. The thing about 25 years of experience is that you learn to read the signs. You document everything, you read the fine print, and you never assume that loyalty flows both ways. Companies will talk about family and values and all that corporate nonsense, but when push comes to shove, they'll throw you overboard to save a few dollars on the quarterly report. That's why you write your own insurance policy. Bury it in the contract language where the MBAs are too arrogant to look. And when they inevitably try to screw you over, you remind them that experience isn't just about knowing how to do the job. It's about knowing how to protect yourself when they decide you're too expensive to keep around. The money was nice, don't get me wrong. $4.8 million buys a lot of peace of mind. But the real satisfaction was watching a bunch of people who thought they were smarter than everyone else learn that sometimes the old guy actually knows what he's doing. They thought they were playing chess, but I'd been planning this game for years. And in chess, experience always beats arrogance. Always read the fine print. Always protect yourself. And never underestimate the value of 25 years of experience. Even if some 32-year-old MBA thinks he knows better, that's a lesson they'll remember for a long time.